Hi, everybody. This is Dave Walker, the CEO and co-founder of the B2SMB Institute, and I am joined today by Jim Fitzgerald, who's the CEO of Teradel. Welcome, Jim.
Good to be here.
And I'm also joined by Sean Cohen, who is the COO and one of the original team from Aweber. Hi, Sean. How you doing?
I'm great, Dave. Thanks for having us.
Good to have you both here. So, I asked you guys to come here to talk about the virtual workforce working remotely. But before I get into that, I just want to give you each an opportunity to kind of give me a quick 411 on your company, Jim. What does Teradel do?
So we provide a web-based platform that makes it easy for small businesses to do targeted, multi-channel, integrated direct marketing campaigns. And we've been around for about 16 years, and we've successfully transacted with over 17,000 small businesses. In addition to going to market under our own brand, we also take our platform and provide branded turnkey solutions for companies like FedEx Office, Staples, Office Depot, Canada Post, and most recently, the United States Postal Service.
So that must expand your distribution enormously.
Yeah, it does. It's been incredibly helpful. We call them our strategic partners, and they're exposing us to just literally thousands and thousands of more opportunities. And selfishly, we're able to get a lot more volume from a media standpoint. So we're buying a lot more product and a lot more media, which gives us a bit of pricing in the marketplace, which we can then pass along to the small business owner.
That's terrific. So Sean, give us the 411 on Aweber.
Sure. Aweber, we provide powerfully simple email marketing tools to small business customers around the world. We've been very fortunate to have been able to serve over 1 million small business customers over the last 20 some years. We were the pioneers of the autoresponder and follow-up sequence way back in the day when you would send out one autoresponder and a sequence of messages. And, those days are still, somewhat here as you create campaigns and newsletters and things like that, but it's all based on email. So, our suite of tools helps customers create a landing page, a beautiful set of emails designed specifically for your business, and being able to get your messages to your prospects and customers with deliverability being a huge key to that.
And we are proud users at the B2SMB Institute of the Aweber platform. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
How did you give us your background? You have a lot of passion for small businesses. How did that start? And how did you? And you were, correct me if I'm wrong, but you were one of the original folks at Aweber. How did your journey begin?
I actually started my career at Aweber. So Aweber is a little over about 23 years old. I've been with Aweber almost 20 years. I was employee number 4, and I started in customer support. I was the only person who was picking up the phone and answering emails from our customers, a much smaller customer base at that point. But I did that. And throughout my career, I always categorize my roles as being as close to the customer as possible. I never got away from the ability or desire to listen to customers, actually talk on the phone with them when possible. And I really sort of set up our team around that, right? Having a lot of passion and empathy for the businesses that we get to serve, because small businesses, as we all know, are unlike any other business. When you're working with an entrepreneur who is business operator by day, finance person by night, and constant worrier, 24/7, it's a different world. And being able to serve them is something that we take a lot of joy in. So my career has really taken from customer support through business development, now sort of operations, and then chief operating officer and president. I've always stayed as close as possible to the customer. And, today my role is really leading all of our teams. Whether that's our technical teams, whether that's our marketing or customer solutions teams, always with the eye of how do we best serve the customer? What is their needs? What is it they need out of our product? And how can we better suit them? So my career again has been with Aweber, but really spanned upon lots of different departments where I got lots of different opportunities to serve customers in different and unique ways, and then kind of bringing that full circle to the role that I'm in now.
And you were employee number 4. How many employees does Aweber have now?
We have over 100 team members now. So being number 4 in a very small office back then gives me a lot of things to look back upon.
Some of which I'm sure are incriminating. Jim, with Fenway in the background, you are, I know, a Boston guy, but you are currently in Richmond, Virginia. Give me your 411, your background.
Yeah, so I spent most of my career in print and graphic arts and started in sales and then worked my way through a number of positions into executive leadership for companies like International Paper, but also even down to smaller, more regional commercial printers. And was always somehow involved in direct mail, and I kind of have a passion for it. I still believe it's a very powerful medium. And one of the things that intrigued me was we have a lot of opportunity with the internet to reach an audience, but there's an awful lot of small businesses out there that really don't have access to some of the segmentation tools and data that's available. So I thought there might be an opportunity to democratize that and create an environment where the SMBs could get into the same kind of level that the Capital Ones have to reach a targeted audience. And once we did that, we realized that direct mail is wonderful, and we still believe it's a powerful, invasive medium that somebody has to look at when it shows up in the mailbox, and somebody has to touch it and read it. But we also thought it was important to amplify that message with digital marketing. So that's what we did in the last couple of years. We recently layered in things like Facebook and display and email. So now we can reach that same audience over and over again with both digital and traditional direct mail.
And along the way, you built a platform. It wasn't just basically a service. Is that right?
Yeah. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes. But when a user goes to our site, they can build in just a couple of minutes a heat map of their trade area, so they can see the postal carrier routes that have the highest percentage of people that look like their existing customers. So we take the least expensive postage product from a discount perspective. It's a saturation mail product, but we help the SMB reach just the routes that have high concentrations of the people they're trying to reach. Mm-hmm. And traditionally, a lot of SMBs, we just do like a radius, let's say, around their home office or their store. Now we give them tools where they can go in and surgically select just the routes where people are much more likely to buy.
Right. That is pretty powerful. Okay, so question I ask everybody in these interviews we've been doing. Do you remember where you were and what was going on when you kind of had the aha moment a few months back that, man, we're entering a crisis? Sean, I'll start with you. Do you remember that moment? Was that a moment, or was it really kind of a day, or how did you come to realize that things are not going to be the same for a while?
For me, it was a series of several moments, kind of leading up. I was thinking about this, and the end of February we had traveled, and I remember being just a little concerned, kind of seeing things that were happening on the West Coast, and we were staying on the East Coast, and we were sort of in a position where it's like, on one hand, nothing's happening around here. On the other hand, it seems to be moving fast in the areas that it's moving in. And then when we got back from our travel, I feel like things just went kind of went crazy. The cases started flowing quickly across the country, and we started putting together a lot of what if scenarios, right? What if it reaches this point? What if it reaches that point? Work from home was always a high level discussion. But I had been following it pretty close, so there was never sort of an aha moment, but it was one of those that I think escalated really quickly, and one that we sort of went from we're probably not going to be affected to, oh crap, we got to make some significant changes really quickly to stay on top of this and keep everyone safe. So I feel like we went 100 miles an hour or more very quickly.
Yeah, I think a lot of people share that the speed with which you had to react
Yep.
was extraordinary. Jim, how about you?
Yeah, like Sean, I was traveling. In fact, my wife and I had planned a 2 week vacation, which, quite frankly, we had never done before. And we
Of
were,
course.
I,
Great timing.
just call me lucky. So, so we were in Florida, Clearwater Beach, actually, and it was we were booked through March 18th, and on March 14th, I said, "How do you feel about going home tomorrow morning?" Just based on what was going on around us and the news, and people were still eating in restaurants, but I noticed even in the restaurant and the hotel getting fewer and fewer guests every evening. And I said, I think it's time to get back. And I went to the office that Monday, and that was the last time. I think that was the 16th. That was the last time all the folks in my office were in one place.
So I want to talk to you obviously now about working virtually, working remotely. Uh, I had an interesting conversation with Todd Wilkins, who's the chief product officer of ShipStation today, and he said, I've learned that I've started to avoid using the word remote because of all of the baggage that comes with it. You feel like you're on an island, you feel like you're being pushed off. I really like to call it distributed. I like to say, I like to use the word distributed work, which I kind of sort of agree with. But what was the day that you guys decided we have to go remote. We have to go distributed virtual, however you want to describe it. Everybody needs to go home and shelter in place, but still try to do their jobs. Sean, do you remember what that day was? And then as a follow on, briefly, what did you have to do? Did you have to go like Brock Blake at Lendio had to go buy 100,000, 200 Dell laptops? The team at Ruby had to go out and effectively rewire 750 telephone receptionists in-home capabilities, literally a 48-hour period. What were some of the things that you had to do when you went remote?
I will say that we were very fortunate, so when we made the decision to go remote, our entire team already had laptops. We were able to pivot pretty quickly when we made the initial decision. Although I went back and looked at the original email that I sent to my team, and, optimistically, I told everyone to be prepared to work from home for 2 weeks. As I sit back and reflect on that now, how naive I was, but when everyone first went home, even though we believed it would be a short period of time, we still did a lot of due diligence to make sure that everyone had equipment. We didn't really want people to go home, work from their kitchen table and with their kitchen, chair, and be completely uncomfortable. So we literally sent people home with their full suite of equipment. So that's big monitors, their desks if they needed it, chairs if they needed it. We wanted to make sure that people could not skip a beat, and that was really important to us. So our team really went into preparation mode really quickly. The backbone of what we do through VPN, we had to make sure that that was all taken care of, and making sure that people had remote or internet access that could be depended on. And that was big because the day before they didn't really have to worry about that. You know,
Hmm.
if they had a spotty internet connection, that wasn't a big deal. But, you know, somebody going home and then having to talk on the phone with our clients 24/7, that became a really big deal. So, you know, it was equipment first, making sure that everyone had the appropriate equipment. And then, you know, we started doing a lot of due diligence with internet tests and things like that to make sure that everyone had the proper setups. You know, so I would say that we were more fortunate than others that we didn't have to go out and sort of buy all new equipment. We were pretty well prepared to kind of make the move. But we were prepared that day for what seemed like it was going to be a few weeks. Preparing to go 100% remote, you know, certainly took a lot more work.
And Jim, how about you? How about your team?
Yeah, so you know, it's a bit of a change living in Boston and then living in Richmond, Virginia. And the reason I mention that is if there's a threat of a flurry in Richmond, everything shuts down. So we had already experienced to some degree what you have to do if you want to keep working in this town. So we set up the team with access to, you know, we're just about everything we do is SaaS based. So whenever we had a forecast, we do have a pretty sophisticated telephony system. So we asked our salespeople to bring their phones home with them, and they just plug them into an Ethernet cable and off they go. So we had been doing that for probably the last 4 or 5 years. And when, you know, we made that decision on that Monday that, you know, this is just a scene that's not going to change for a while, we just went into exactly the same mode. And I think, like Sean, you know, let's get this done for a couple of weeks, and then we'll reconnoiter and figure out what we're going to do next. And as we both know, as we all know, it's been much longer than that. From an equipment standpoint, you know, a lot of people have access to, you know, their own PC or laptop at home, so they were happy to do that. Once we all realized this was going to sink in, um, you know, our folks work on desktops in the office, and they've got two pretty large monitors. They're looking at a lot of data back and forth, and most of these folks are salespeople. So um, they came in and just simply took their equipment home with them and moved it there. And if they wanted their chair, they're welcome to it, or anything, quite frankly, whatever they wanted to make their experience better at home, they were welcome to take. And everyone's kind of done whatever works for them. But fortunately, we had the infrastructure in place, you know, prior to this. And, you know, also we're a, you know, we're in an environment where that wasn't a terribly difficult transition because we had had a little bit of experience with it.
What were some of the, Jim, what were some of the early lessons that kind of came to light specifically around just managing your workforce? What were the things?
It's a great question. You know, there is I think everybody's get a level of anxiety about what's going on, and communication, I think, became very important. You tend to forget what I call the management by the minute when you bump into somebody going to get a cup of coffee. It just goes away. And I'm fortunate, most of my executive team has been with us for a long time. We know each other pretty well. And my SVP of business development said, you know, I know you're not crazy about meetings, but, you know, do you think at least for the next few weeks we could try to catch up every afternoon for half an hour? And I got to tell you guys, I'm spending more time meeting with my management team than I ever have, and it's actually good. So our, you know, we're much more focused on what we're doing, and I also think everybody is hearing, you know, from me every day as to how I feel things are going, and I think hopefully that's somewhat reassuring. And as far as the team in general, we're scheduling regular meetings so we can just kind of talk through what's going on, get some feedback. And we just recently had our first kind of physical get together. We have a patio at the office, and everyone we did a kind of bring your own beer, wine sort of thing, and we, you know, appropriately social distanced, but got everyone kind of in the same area for a couple of hours, and that was cool. So
That's great.
yeah.
And Sean, what about you? What were some of your early lessons?
Yeah, very similar to Jim. I mean, we tried to, at the very beginning, the team went into a mode of basically trying to replicate everything that we did at the office over video. So whether that was one-on-ones or our some meetings or our, which are stand-up meetings, or our weekly meetings. So everything was sort of then done over chat, which again, I think seamlessly worked pretty well for us because we got to see each other a lot. One of my biggest lessons, at least from my peers, was, talking on the phone with somebody is far different than being able to see their face and see their inflections, and really kind of get that bond going. And that's something that I think early on we realized. So we probably do far more video calls than not. And, I think there was a little bit of a burnout at some point. Everyone was doing video calls all day for work. And then there was a period of time where all of our friends wanted to do video calls. And by the end of the day, it's like you get off the phone. It's like, well, that was my 14th video call of the day. I'm completely burned out. So it's about trying to find good, happy medium. So early lessons were that, we try to be as face-to-face as much as possible. I do a weekly leadership meeting with my team where we spend a couple of hours together every week kind of working on the business. And we felt as though keeping that intact was really important for us. And then I do a weekly one-on-one with all of our leadership team, which I kept going. And some of it's a 10-minute check-in, some of it's an hour. It just depends on what the needs are. But being able to see each other and really connect was really important. I think that was one of our early lessons that I'm happy to share was a success from while we were in the office and translated really well to this virtual world.
And was feedback bubbling up from your folks? Was it bubbling up in the form of, here's what we're discovering in how we're managing our own work, and here's what we're discovering and what we needed as far as resources? Was that bubbling up immediately? Did it take time for them to figure out that okay, this is, I really have to say something about this? What did you find?
Yeah, I think the team, at least initially, I mean, after the shock kind of wore off, I think there was a lot of, well, I did it this way when we were in the office. What should we do now? And my answer to that is, let's find out a way, right? Like, what is it that we were able to do in the office so successfully that we need to translate now to this remote world? And I would say that question came up a lot, and it was very, I would say in the grand scheme of things, like some minor things, but it was what was on their mind, and it was what they were concerned about. Because when you are so used to working in one way for so long, you get used to it, and breaking those patterns is really difficult. So I think it just took time to realize that ultimately everything that we were doing in the office, for the most part, again, like Jim said, like, the bumping into each other when we're having coffee, you don't get that anymore. Or turning around and talking to your neighbor, you don't get that anymore or get it as easily. So one of the lessons that we learned early on was, we have these open video meetings that basically stay on all day, and people can just come in and come out of them. So like, let's say our customer service team will have a Zoom or a Google Meet meeting that's open for like 3 hours. And it's just an open meeting where people can drop in and out. And literally people will go onto it and they will work. Sometimes they don't even talk to each other, but the fact that they can see each other and they could potentially just kind of turn around and ask a questions, that's really helped them replicate that like sort of in-office setting and some of the things that we're missing. And I'd say that every one of our teams here have replicated that in some way, shape, or form. They're not on all day, but let's say there's, like, we call them open office hours, and it happens for an hour a day. And the team can really, benefit from that. And it'll be anywhere from 2 to 15 people who jump on at any particular time. And that can get really disruptive, but it kind of works. It's just sort of a little bit of background noise. I can see my peers as I'm going about my day, and questions get asked really fluently in there. The other thing that that worked really well for us is we use Slack, and we've instituted like a don't ask, just call policy. So like nothing's more disruptive than someone saying, hey, can I call you? But if you were in the office, you would just turn around and ask them. So just call them. And if they don't answer, they're not available. But it eliminates that one step where you're feeling fearful of like disrupting somebody. Just like where in your office, if you were busy, you either would say, hey, get back to me in a couple minutes, or or you wouldn't answer because you'd maybe have your headset on. So there's a lot of times where my Slack calls will just ring and somebody will just ask a question, and I honestly welcome that stuff and I really enjoy it.
That's really interesting. And then Jim, what about for your team?
Yeah, before I forget, I love that idea of having that open meeting.
It's
I
a
think
great idea. It's a great
yeah, the teams are meeting on a regular basis, but cross team stuff, I think that's an excellent idea. Yeah, and I've thought about this. I think there's never a good time for a pandemic. Don't get me wrong, but boy, we're awful fortunate that we're at this point technologically that it happened. When you think about SaaS and you think about things like Slack and Zoom, imagine where we'd be if this were 10, 15 years ago. It would be incredibly difficult. And yeah, some of the things, I mean, culturally, what I see going on in Slack, 3 months ago, I'd be making this kind of face, and now, my tolerance level is so much higher. Um, Things like phone calls, and I'll be perfectly honest with you, I'm an empty nester. I'm an old guy. And, I get on a Zoom call and sometimes with customers, and I've got folks on my team with kids screaming in the background. And I'm like, come on, can't you do something? And then you suddenly realize, mom and dad are both working and the kids are home, and this is going to happen. This is the new normal, right? Mm-hmm. So those are adjustments that I think are happening, and it's just it's such a huge shift from an old school guy like me is kind of used to from a work environment. Work was it used to be work was a place you go. It's not what you do, and I think we've kind of taken that now and stood it on its head, right? Work is what you do. It's not where you go. So I think I've certainly learned a lot and understand much better now what people are going through. And I think that, if we really drill down, is my biggest concern is, what is the cultural and social impact of this? And what are the things we can do to keep people connected?
Right. But as you said, it's a great phrase. It's not, it's what you do, not where you go. So to the punchline, how long are you going to have a remote workforce, Sean?
We are not going back. So this is the new normal for us. Aweber is 100% remote, and we will be doing this for as long as we can. So I can say for as far out as I can see in the future, this is us. This is it.
Wow. And Jim, how about you? How about Teradel?
There's so many reasons why I agree with Sean. And again, if we just need to, I think longer term post COVID, I want to work on the social part of it, but the no commuting, people seem to love it. Quite frankly, our team's more productive. They just are. There's things they've got to do. Particularly, I know school age children are a challenge, but I think once that gets resolved, and it will, I think people become even more productive. And I think at the end of the day, they love it. And you look at things like rent, that will go away. Our lease expires in April. I can't see any reason why I would renew it, which leads to a whole nother conversation and challenge, what is the impact on that economically, right? But it's very difficult to rationalize office space right now.
Yeah, and I think that and Sean, you've got a pretty substantial facility that in outside of Philadelphia, right?
Yeah, we have about 70,000 square feet. So
Wow.
that is a big office. that we will be doing something else with at the, as the future unfolds. But the other part about this that I've been thinking about, and again, nothing's set in stone, but, I would love to believe that, for us, it will be about going from 70,000 square feet, big palatial office to something much smaller. I feel as though we'll likely always have some sort of touchdown space with conference rooms and things like that where people can go if they want. But I think the difference will be is that when we're remote first, it means when you're in a meeting, it's headsets on, it's, video chats with anyone who's not at the meeting, so that the person who's not at the meeting isn't at the disadvantage anymore. Whereas that's sort of the case now where we I know we kind of talked through this, but we previously had like a very flexible remote work policy where you could work remote sort of whenever you wanted, as long as your presence inside the office wasn't a requirement for a meeting or something like that. It was just do what you need to do in order to get the work done. But the fact is, everything with the nucleus was at the office. So if somebody was remote and they were the one calling into the meeting, everyone would be sort of either huddled around one little central conference. We use Google Meet, so it would be like a Meet camera or something like that. And the person who was remote would always sort of be at that disadvantage because they would be the only person remote. They wouldn't be able to pick up any sidebar conversations that were happening, things of that nature. So they always sort of missed something. So by going remote first, if we have, let's say, 3 people at the office and 3 people remote, those 3 people at the office would still be expected to be on, their headsets and do a video chat for the call the same way we're doing right now, so that we can really truly embrace that remote first nature of our business. But I always see us having some sort of touchdown space, but certainly much smaller than we have now, and likely, different.
So clearly, neither of you guys made this decision lightly, and kind of the implications of it. But you've learned a lot in the last 4 months. Um, in talking to Kevin Marasco from Zenefits, and Zenefits, of course, kind of sits at the heart of HR management, all things HR management for over 10,000 small businesses. And what they define as small is between 100 and 500 employees. But his take in the last 4 months, and kind of being not only inside of Zenefits, but inside really the heart of these of 10,000 customers, is that there's a new work order taking shape. And I kind of want to put each of the 3 parts of that new work order in front of you and ask you, is this what you see coming? As you kind of now have done what you've done, do you see first a new associate profile, a new kind of employee profile taking shape? And if so, what is that profile? What's the ideal Aweber employee? What's the ideal Teradel employee? Jim, I'll start with you.
It's funny. Prior to COVID, we were interviewing for a senior digital marketing manager, and we had some great candidates. And there was one woman who was just superlative, but we recruited from, let's say, DC down to Raleigh-Durham, and she was up in the DC area, but she said, I just don't want to move to Richmond. And I said, well, that's a shame. And we moved on. And now I think if I have that conversation today, without hesitating, I would have hired that woman. So I think so now you don't have a universe that's where you're limited geographically. You're, quite frankly, it can be international. And look at, if you have a culture, if you have a skill set that you're trying to match, what are the odds of matching that if you exponentially increase the universe you're looking from? And that's my perspective. That's the big aha for me.
There's an interesting inverse of that too, which is that as somebody who might be looking for work, you don't have to look within a 25-minute drive time any longer of where you live. You can effectively find opportunities now thousands of miles away and be effective. Sean, how about for you? Do you think that because I know you were very much involved in almost all the hiring at Aweber, do you see kind of a different profile taking shape?
Well, first and foremost, I mean, I 100% agree with Jim. I mean, just, looking back at some of the candidates that we probably, said no to only for geographic, locations. Yeah, I almost want to go back to some of them and see where they're at this point, because they were probably some really amazing people. But I think the thing that we're, from a profile perspective, the thing that we're kind of keying in on are people who truly desire to work remotely long term, right? Because right now everyone is working remotely, and it is very easy to take for granted, or that they will want to work remotely permanently. So making sure that we're asking those questions, because I think we can all agree that post-COVID, working remotely is far different than working remotely today. And it takes a special type of person to want to do that, and it's not for everyone, and that's okay. I think there'll always be a world where we, we'll have offices and people will work in them, and that's okay. But if you truly thrive in an office environment and that's where you see yourself long term, but you're going to take a remote position to sort of, because you think you can make it work, I think that's going to be a challenge for people. So, that's a really hard profile to build, because it takes a lot of interviews and it takes a lot of, questions to get through that. And I don't think we've perfected it yet, but I certainly think that's a profile that we're trying to build. Because certainly once this is all over, we don't want to lose a whole bunch of people who aren't happy anymore and want to return to the office. We want to be open and honest with people and let them know that there's going to be challenges along the way, but we need people who are up for the challenge, and who want to help us succeed at this, versus always having the exit path clearly laid out.
So the second bucket, I guess, under the new work order, second feature of the new work order, by Kevin's observation, is new work processes. And I'm struck by the fact that both of you operate complicated businesses that probably over the course of time have been, Sean, in your case, as a COO, have been operated. I mean, they've really been refined. They've really been streamlined, and and many times I would imagine the function fits the form. And you're doing things the way that it's laid out kind of physically to get the work done.
Mm-hmm.
How do you see your processes really fundamentally changing and doing the work that you do currently?
Yeah, I think the number one thing that we're working on right now is the notion of asynchronous communication. Really making sure that we can bridge that gap, where, a perfect example of this would be, a meeting that happens with a group of people to kind of brainstorm an idea, but there's always a nucleus to that, right? Like, I want other people to kind of talk about my idea. And asynchronous means you write that idea down so that's public, and that you can get lots of different people providing lots of different avenues or information or ideas, and you have this sort of public repository of information, which we've always tried to have. We use really good tooling for it, but I think it's more important today, and will be even more important as we grow. Right now, I think one of our biggest challenges that we're thinking about is, how do we hire people who are not in our same time zones? Right? We have, a group of people, a group of processes that is all really synchronized around East Coast time zone. But what happens when we introduce somebody who's on the West Coast and needs to be in those same meetings, or needs to benefit from those same meetings? We're not currently set up for that. And being able to sort of overcome that challenge from a process perspective is huge. And it's going to take really robust documentation. It's going to take new tooling, likely, to better do that process, because we can't have all meetings happen at noon, right? Like, so that it's best for for all time zones. But also, what happens when and if we decide to go international, and that makes time zones even more complicated. And I don't want to be in a position position where we don't hire people simply because of that. I want to be able to embrace the world. And, I don't think we're there yet, but I think that's one of those process challenges, really getting very good at asynchronous communication and documenting things in a way that can live and breathe and be there so that more people can contribute to it and we can just continue to improve.
And Jim, you described something, a little bit like a drone operator sitting in front of two huge screens. And I know how intense the data analytics required to do what you do. What are there, like 250,000 carrier routes probably around the United States? So how are you going to, really interested, how are you going to work your process as relates to data management, data-driven decision making?
I think we're fortunate that we've done a lot in the past to take lots of friction out of our processes. I think operationally, the day-to-day of what we do when we work with a customer hasn't really changed much. My biggest concern is I wouldn't call it a process, but if you think about the number of lunches you have with the people you work with and the number of trips you go on with the people and the conferences you attend and the time you spend together, and that the human side of what happens when you're communicating at that level has gone away, at least for now. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if there's a solution out there that resolves that. And I think that's my biggest concern. If we look at, somebody might describe that as a process. It's the communication process, right? And it's been totally disrupted. And those are the things that I think about is, how are we going to make up for that? The ideas that happen, and quite frankly, the truth that comes out at the bar at a conference that you might not run into in your regular 4:30 management meeting. Those are the things that I'm pondering.
Yeah, or a teachable moment after a pitch. I mean, and
right.
I'm as old as you are, and I know how much I gained and how much I benefited from that physical contact, basically.
Exactly.
So I hear definitely what you're saying, but it's a good bridge to the third feature, basically, of New Work Order. And Jim, why don't you take it first, because it's I think you can bridge off of it from what you were just talking about, and that's the change in work styles. Is that we're going to have changes in work profiles, we're going to have changes in work processes, but we're also going to have changes in work styles. What do you see happening? You've alluded to a couple of things already, but what impact is the change in work style going to have on Teradol?
I think, as I understand your question, it's, we have a way of doing business that was around, since we started the business. We had a dress code. We had a certain expectation of our employees. We were pretty rigid about being on time. And I'm being, Dave, that's what 60-year-olds think about. And as I've lived through this the last few months, I just think, quite frankly, about how silly some of this stuff is. And that's been kind of freeing for me. People, smart, creative people are going to do what they love to do. And they don't need to be wearing a button-down shirt or khakis or be sitting at their desk at 8:30, not 8:35 in the morning. And that's been really helpful. And quite frankly, I think is just going to help us going forward, from a team building and recruitment standpoint. A lot of these things just aren't that important anymore.
And Sean, how about you? Changes in work style that you see evident in the team around you, and how are you changing?
It's sort of funny to come and follow Jim on that one, because I was giving a tour to somebody at our office. And for those who don't know, I mean, our office had sliding boards and it had, more beanbag chairs than I could count. And as I was giving the tour, there was a group of people in the middle of the day playing pool. And the person that I was giving a tour to asked if they were on their lunch break. And I said, no, probably not. They're just playing pool, kind of blowing off some steam. And they're like, that would drive me crazy. I mean, it's the middle of the day. And I said, well, they're also likely here till 7 o'clock. The time just doesn't make that much of a difference anymore. It's just about getting work done. And they were likely talking about work. They were kind of going over an idea, and it just happened to be doing it over a game of pool. So I think we've always really embraced that new style, that notion that like work doesn't necessarily have to happen at your desk between the hours of 9 to 5 and with khakis and a polo on, right? Like it just, we've sort of already embraced that. So I think the change to being remote, I think really just supported that notion that we've already felt really comfortable with it. I think the biggest thing for us is going to be what we talked about before, is just, how to take that same sort of notion and translate that to, different time zones around the country, so that, a meeting that happens, at a time that's really inconvenient for somebody else, how do they still be included, provide value to it, and ultimately help move us forward. So, in part, I think we got some of that right already, and I think that it freaked some people out. I think how progressive we may have been as it related to that. But at the end of the day, when you have really smart people who care a lot about your customers, at the end of the day, the ways in which they work may feel different, but they have the intentions, and as long as you have a really good process, I think really great things happen from there.
So in wrapping up, there's a lot of your peers who are listening to this right now who are um, in varying stages of going through the consideration of how long do we stay remote, and how do we uh, change to manage that. What do you, looking back on it, and the decisions that you guys have arrived at, what do you think are the top one, two, or three questions that you would advise a peer? Hey, answer these questions first. Make sure that you prioritize your answers to these questions, because I either didn't or I did, and I felt great about it, or I felt, oh boy, I missed that. Sean, why don't you go first?
Sure. The number one question, and I'm sure anyone who's heard me talk at Beta SMB previously knows this is coming, but is, can your culture handle it? Because that to me is the lifeblood of your organization. And if you don't have things sort of well prepared, your culture can certainly take a major hit. And can it bounce back? So making sure that you have a lot of attention to your culture. How do you maintain the culture of your organization? How do you maintain, the communication, the fun, the spirit of your company when the nucleus is no longer the office space? And again, that's something I'm fearful of, and I'm always concerned about. But I think that would be my number one question, that I would make sure that somebody's prepared to ask. And then the other part, it sort of goes along with what we talked about here, is making sure that you have the systems and processes in place. If your company has never used, a video chat platform, this is very different to get used to. So if you're not used to doing this, start thinking about it now. Start thinking about how you institute it into your day-to-day, and improve upon it with the notion of fully embracing it as you move forward, not a means to an end that you'll stop using once this goes away. Because I foresee that travel is going to reduce for the foreseeable future, and we're going to have way more of these, the more that you embrace it, the more you get better at it, the more comfortable you become with the technology, I think the better off you'll be. And I think we were fortunate to have some of that baked in, but there's lessons to be learned every single day for us, and it's something we think about a lot. So those are definitely the two major things. I think the other thing is making sure that your team is set up to work from home, right? And they want to work from home, and you have those honest and open conversations with people. I know for certain we have team members who, likely don't want to be remote first for their entire career. They've made that very clear, and we're embracing that and having really open and honest conversations. But if we ignore it, the problem doesn't go away, right? You have to take it face on, and you have to have one-on-one conversations with people to say, like, it's different today. Like, working from home in a year from now will likely be far different, and we believe it'll be better. But let's keep that dialogue going so that, if another choice needs to be made, we're all prepared for it.
That's great questions, great advice. Jim, what would you?
Yeah, Sean did an excellent job. Yeah, the one thing I would throw out there is, as much as I'm enamored with what's going on right now at this snapshot in time with how this is working, in the back of my head, the defensive part of me is always considering, what do I have to do if I pivot? Because we just don't know societally what's going to happen with a bunch of people that suddenly work from home. 3 months may be a honeymoon, but it is 12 months, 18 months from now. Are people still going to feel the same way? Are people going to have this yearning? We're social animals. Are they going to have this yearning to get back into that environment? So I'm just trying to cover my bases and think through, as we look at the team and as we just look at normal attrition, just keep an eye on what it is when people are moving on, which they will do. Uh, what's driving that? Are they going to a place that embraces kind of the office culture, or is it some other reason? And that's kind of going forward, the things that I'd be asking.
Guys, I can't thank you enough. I think this has been really insightful, and I always appreciate talking to the people who are actually doing it or have done it. And you guys are certainly doing it and have done it. And I think that our audience can learn a lot from what you guys have laid out and shared today. So I can't tell you how much I appreciate it. Sean, thanks very much for participating, and look forward to maybe seeing you live at some point in the next 2 years. But thanks very much for helping out.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure. And I look forward to that day when we see each other face to face again. That's for sure.
Yep. And Jim, thank you as well. Great insights. And I really appreciate your participation.
Always a pleasure, Dave. Thanks so much for having me.
All right, everybody. Thanks very much.
Yeah.